All righty, ladies and gentlemen, nice to see everyone here today. We know we have lots of food afterwards. I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight with impending bad weather, but I thought we'd make it through. It was at midday. It was kind of like what we're going to do. So I was studying the weather maps, got out my meteorological beanie, and I predicted that we wouldn't have anything until after we're done. Okay? So I'd like to, first of all, thank the Trinity Church for having us here this evening. I'm sure we'll be hearing lots about the Royal Charter. Dave Wilson, the lector of the church, probably knows more about that than anyone in this room, I would imagine. Oh, maybe Don Peck. I don't know.
Maybe.
No, right? Okay. So I'd like to thank all the Hardy people that came out here tonight and all the Hardy Trinity people that came out here tonight. This is a very, very important event, the 250th anniversary of the Royal Charter of the Church. When you go back in the town's history, you go back 250 years. That's quite some time, okay? The history that came through this church, the people that I've known through this church, how many people are familiar with Father Bob? I knew Bob for a long time over with the Historic Preservation Commission. And from the limited round of research that I did, Father Bob has the second longest tenure of any of the pastors in the church over the history of the church.
He was here for 33 years, and his predecessor was here for 37.
37, that's right.
Yeah, and Father Bob was the one who actually had the charter preserved and framed, which is why you can see it now in the back behind the baptismal font.
There you go. So as Dave, like I said, Dave is the church lector.
Warden, whatever.
Whatever you
I'm a
are.
lector too,
Okay.
as it happens.
Well,
so it's okay.
I was reading. I didn't read enough then.
Whatever.
So without further ado, thank you, Dave.
Thank you. This all started out about 6 months ago at the Barron Arts Center flea market. I had a table, the Historical Association had a table, and I'd been thinking about, well, I knew this anniversary was coming up, so how do we mark the occasion? Thought about a fundraising gala, but that didn't really seem to gain any traction. So at the flea market, by the time the day was over, I talked to Dan and Don and figured, what do you think? And they were happy with the idea, and then from there, the planning started. I know Frank Joseph and Ginny Kershaw were back and forth quite a bit making that happen. And I just want to say thank you on behalf of Trinity to Dan and Don and Frank and Ginny and Mother Angie Cipolla, our priest in charge, who allowed this to happen tonight. And thanks to all of you for coming. We appreciate your willingness to be part of this observance of the anniversary. And when Dan talked about 250 years being a long time, that certainly is the case. You have to figure, Woodbridge was 100 years old by the time we received the charter. And in fact, there had been Anglicans worshiping in Woodbridge for more than 70 years before we received the charter. When I say Anglicans, we're talking about the Church of England here. Because, we know Trinity Church by that name. It's also Trinity Episcopal Church. You can see it on the sign out front. The Episcopal Church started in 1789 after the Revolutionary War. And the Diocese of New Jersey, which we're a part of, actually started 4 years earlier in 1785. But, until the Revolution came, we were, in essence, part of the Church of England. So the Bishop of London was responsible for all the missionary work that was being done in the colonies, including here in New Jersey. So the bishop would ordain priests, whether they were in England already or were here in the colonies. They'd go to England and be ordained and then come back. And initially, you have a list of our colonial era priests. I'll be referring to that over the next few minutes. And you can see that the first missionary to come to Woodbridge, the Reverend Edward Portlock, was actually requested by the proprietors of East Jersey. Of course, New Jersey back then was divided in half, east and west, as opposed to north and south, as we know it. And East Jersey, the capital was Perth Amboy. So Reverend Portlock, he's ordained, he's sent to the U.S. by the Bishop of London on behalf of the proprietors of East Jersey who were living in England at the time, and he becomes the first rector of St. Peter's in Perth Amboy. Makes sense, right? That was the capital, so that's where he was based. And he would go around to surrounding towns and conduct services. And by the way, by the time we get through this whole list, you'll see that was sort of the model. You know, we think of church, right? You have at least one priest who's there, and that's his or her only congregation. That's not how it was back then. You'd have ministers that would be serving multiple congregations in multiple cities. And the Reverend Portlock got that started because he was preaching not only here in Woodbridge, but also in Elizabethtown and Piscataway. And you can see how it played out from there, that you'd have a minister that was based in Perth Amboy or New Brunswick or Elizabeth, and they would come to Woodbridge to hold services either on a regular basis or on a not so regular basis, depending on the priest. Now, things changed a little bit beginning of the 1700s because there was an organization formed in England called the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in Foreign Parts. That's what the colonies were to the English back then, foreign parts. And what I found interesting in just sort of doing the research is that indeed that society still exists 320 years later almost. It's now called United Society of Partners in the Gospel, but it has the same function, of supporting priests, of supporting congregations around the world. And the Reverend George Keith, who was the second of our ministers, was also one of the first two missionaries to be appointed by this society. Came over in 1702, again, based in Perth Amboy. He'd actually surveyed Perth Amboy before he got here. And, came to Woodbridge from time to time. And we had a couple of other missionaries like that. And I would point out, how many of you were here, by the way, for the historical tour that we did in connection with the dig at the rectory? Some of you were here? You may remember me talking about those windows in the back? All right, so we know that Edward Portlock and George Keith are the two windows that I'm pointing to in the back to your right as you're looking. Kind of hard to see them in the dark, unfortunately, but yes, they are the gentlemen I'm referring to. Now bear in mind, there was no Anglican congregation as such in Woodbridge at this time. Everybody was still going to the meeting house, which of course became the First Presbyterian Church where you ordinarily have your meetings. Well, they chose to affiliate with the Presbyterians in 1710, and the Anglicans, they weren't happy. They broke away, started their own congregation, and so that's why I have the subheading New Congregation on this list, because the nature of the relationship between the priest and the people changed. The Reverend Edward Vaughan was brought in actually at the invitation of those worshipers who had broken away. And at that time, he raised the money to put up our first church, built by Benjamin Dunham, the youngest son of Jonathan, who of course you all know from the rectory next door, originally his house. So he was in and out for about a decade. And then by the 1720s, there was a gentleman by the Reverend named the Reverend James William Skinner. And I just bring him up because like the first couple of years he came to Woodbridge, and after that, he didn't bother much. We didn't see him. And it was around that time, if you look back in the histories, that the first church basically deteriorated. It wasn't much to begin with, dirt floor, clapboard walls, so it wasn't exactly built to survive, right? So by the time the Reverend Skinner is done in the early 1750s, there's a problem. You have a congregation, but you don't have a church, at least not a structure, right? So that's where we move to the new status part of our list here. And by the way, the windows to the right are the ones I was pointing out earlier along the side wall. You'll see the Reverend Vaughan there, and you also see the Reverend Thomas Bradbury Chandler. He was actually born in the colonies, based in Elizabeth. Came here every 4 weeks at first, then he got sick, and it became every 6 weeks. And so somebody had to lead the services when he wasn't around. That fell to one James Parker, who again you may have heard of as in Parker Press, right? He was the guy who was really kind of pushing to provide, more of a status for the folks here at Trinity. And so the Reverend Chandler went to the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in Foreign Parts and said, we need a church. So he was able to get the money from them to build what became our second church that went up in 1756, lasted for more than a century until it burned down in a fire. And then we got this church, which you see today, built in 1860, consecrated 1861. In any case, so now it's more established, the congregation, thanks to this new church building. We have another gentleman, the Reverend Robert McKean, who spent some time here. Fascinating story. You'll want to look at that later. Physician on top of being a priest. Can you imagine doing both? It'd be unthinkable today, but that's how it was back then. And that brings us to the Reverend John Preston. 1767, he succeeds the Reverend McKean, who died in Perth Amboy. A couple of years later, he officially takes charge here at Trinity, and he decides he's going to make his contribution by getting the Royal Charter. Now, you can understand why he would make that decision. I mean, this is a guy who was serving as a chaplain to the 26th Regiment of the British Army. That's what he did when he wasn't ministering to the folks in Perth Amboy and Woodbridge and nearby towns. And sure enough, when the Revolutionary War breaks out, he has a choice to make. Do I stay with my congregations or do I go with my regiment? He chose the latter. But we do have him to thank for the fact that we have that charter hanging in the back of the church. Now, before we get to the actual reading of the charter, I need to fill you in on a few pieces of terminology that you'll hear that won't be familiar to you. There are a couple of references to William Franklin as the Captain General, the Governor, and the Commander-in-Chief. Captain General was sort of a ceremonial title that was granted by the British monarchy. The Commander-in-Chief, that's where the power was. He would have authority over an army. Of course, the governor gave him a certain amount of authority too, but Captain General, that's sort of passed into the history books. And then I was pointing out to Dan that I'm a warden of the church. It basically means we have two of them. They are in charge of our governing body known as the vestry. At least it was back then. Then there's another phrase, hereditaments. I'd never heard of that one before I started reading this chart. The idea is basically any type of property that can be inherited. One example, or one type, land and buildings. Another example, another type, rents and right-of-way. So we're talking about property. And that was an issue for the church back then. There's another word that comes into play with that, glebe. Right? Land that was set aside to support the clergy in colonies where the Church of England was established. And I read that definition and I thought, really, it kind of ties into Kirk Green, which of course was established back in 1669 when Woodbridge Township was set up. And where you are sitting tonight is part of Kirk Green. So to the extent that that was in trust for Trinity, you might say, well, that was a glebe. And then finally, letters patent. When you hear the word patent, you probably think about inventions, right? Because that's how it's used today. Back then, it had a broader meaning. Letters patent were public documents associated with the granting of powers by the British monarchy. Among other things, you use them to establish corporations. And in fact, the Royal Charter established Trinity as a corporation. So that's sort of the setup here. Now, when it comes to reading the charter, my first thought was, well, I guess you have to do it with a British accent, don't you? And then I started doing a little research and realized, no, you don't. Because it wasn't until the mid-1800s that the British accent, as we understand it today, moved from being the working class accent to what the upper class used. So back then, I don't know, it might have sounded like what we'd hear somebody say in Boston, you know? Pack your car at the Harvard Yard, or something like that. So I just thought, nah, we're not going to do that. We're just going to make this as officious as I can make the word sound. By the way, I'll just point out that there are actually two different books that have the wording of the charter. It's not exactly the same in both of them. The one that you have, it's Woodbridge and Vicinity, the story of a New Jersey Township. Reverend Joseph W. Daly put that together back in 1873. And there's also a history of Trinity Church, Woodbridge, from the Reverend Edward Randolph Wells from 1935, which also has a link. It's not quite the same necessarily, but close enough. So here we are, the Royal Charter of Trinity Church. George III, by the grace of God of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, King, defender of the faith and song, to all to whom these presents shall come greeting. Whereas sundry of our loving subjects, inhabitants of the town of Woodbridge in the county of Middlesex, in behalf of themselves and others, have by their humble petition to our trusty and well-beloved William Franklin, Esquire, our Captain General, Governor, and Commander-in-Chief of our province of New Jersey, set forth that they have erected a church in the town of Woodbridge aforesaid, for preaching the word of God and administering the holy sacraments according to the doctrine and liturgy of the Church of England, and have therefore prayed to be incorporated by the name of the minister, church wardens, and vestry of Trinity Church in Woodbridge, with full power to receive gifts and donations, to purchase land and houses, and to make leases and such rules and orders for the disposal of their church affairs as shall be agreeable to the laws and customs of our kingdom of Great Britain. Know ye therefore that we, willing to give all due encouragement to the professors of the church, as by law established in that part of Great Britain called England, of our especial grace, certain knowledge, and mere motion, have willed, ordained, constituted, given, and granted, and for us, our heirs and successors, do will, ordain, constitute, give, and grant, that the Reverend Mr. John Preston, the present incumbent, Samuel Jakes and Samuel Tingley, the present church wardens, David Alston, Esquire, Thomas Haddon, Joseph Dunham, and Ebenezer Foster, the present vestrymen of said church, and their successors, forever hereafter shall be one body politic and corporate, indeed and in name, by the name of minister, church wardens, and vestrymen of Trinity Church in the town of Woodbridge. And they and their successors by the name of the minister, church wardens, and vestrymen in the town of Woodbridge. One body politic and corporate in deed and in name, really and fully we do by these presents for us, our heirs and successors, elect, ordain, constitute, declare, and create, and also that they and their successors, elected and chosen as hereinafter directed by the name aforesaid, be and forever hereafter shall be capable and able in the law to hold, possess, sue for, recover, and enjoy any lands, hereditaments, or real estate already granted and set apart for glebe to the said church in the said town of Woodbridge, upon the first settlement thereof, or at any time since, and to have, take, receive, and enjoy to them and their successors other messages, lands, tenements, rents, possessions, or other hereditaments, in fee simple or for life, or lives, or years, or in any other manner, to the value of 500 pounds sterling by the year. And also goods, chattels, and all other things of what kind or nature soever in fee and perpetuity, so as the same exceed not at any time the sum of 10,000 pounds sterling, money of Great Britain in the gross, and that they and their successors by the name aforesaid be and forever hereafter shall be persons able and capable in the law to sue or be sued, plead or be pleaded, answer and be answered to, defend and be defended in all courts and places before us, our heirs and successors, and before all and any the judges and justices, officers and ministers of us, our heirs and successors, in all manner of actions, suits, complaints, pleas, causes, matters, and demands, of what nature or kind soever, in as full and ample manner as any other our subjects can or may do. And also that the said minister, churchwardens, and vestrymen of Trinity Church in the town of Woodbridge, for the time being, and their successors, shall and may forever hereafter have and use a common seal, with such device or devices as they shall think proper, for sealing all and singular deeds, leases, grants, conveyances, contracts, and all and singular other instruments, affairs, and business, anyway touching, concerning, and relating to the said corporation. And the same to alter, change, and new make, when and as often as to them shall seem meet and convenient. And we do further of our special grace certain knowledge and mere motion for us, our heirs and successors, will ordain, give, and grant to the minister or incumbent of the said church for the time being, or in case of his absence or death, that the eldest church warden for the time being shall and may from time to time call a meeting of the vestry when and as often as it shall be necessary. And they and their successors forever hereafter, being so met and assembled, shall and may constitute, ordain, and make constitutions, laws, and ordinances for the good of governing and ordering of the affairs of said church, and the same from time to time repealed, as to them, or the majority of them, shall seem convenient. Provided always that the said laws and ordinances so made be not repugnant to the constitutions of our said Church of England as by law established, and for the better and more regular election of the church wardens and vestrymen of the said church forever hereafter, we do hereby further will, ordain, give, and grant that the minister or incumbent of the said church for the time being, together with the church wardens and vestrymen of said church for the time being, shall assemble and meet at the said church yearly and every year on Tuesday in Easter week, and then and there by plurality of votes elect and choose 2 church wardens and so many vestrymen as shall to them seem convenient, not exceeding 10 in the whole, out of the most discreet persons of the congregations of the said church. And we do further of our special grace certain knowledge and mere motion for us, our heirs and successors, by these presents give and grant unto the said minister, church wardens, and vestrymen of Trinity Church in the town of Woodbridge, that they and their successors forever hereafter, all in singular, the rights, privileges, powers, capacities, and authorities herein before mentioned or intended to be granted, shall and may have, hold, or use, without the impediment of us, our heirs and successors, or of any of our officers or ministers whatsoever of us, our heirs and successors. And that these our letters patent, or the enrollment thereof, from time to time and at all times hereafter, be and shall be firm, valid, and effectual in the law toward and against us, our heirs and successors, according to the true intent and meaning thereof, and shall at all times be construed and taken in favor and for the advantage, profit, and benefit of the minister, church wardens, and vestrymen of Trinity Church in the town of Woodbridge, and their successors forever as well, in all courts as elsewhere, notwithstanding any defect, default, or imperfection may be found herein, or any other cause or thing whatsoever. In testimony whereof, we have caused these our letters to be made patent, and the great seal of our said province of New Jersey to be hereunto affixed, and the same to be entered of record in our secretary's office in our said province. Witness our trusty and well-beloved William Franklin Esquire, our Captain General, Governor, and Commander-in-Chief in and over our said province of New Jersey and territories thereon depending in America, Chancellor and Vice Admiral in the same, and so on. At Burlington, the 6th day of December, in the 10th year of our reign, Anno Domini 1769. There's also some writing on the back of the charter by the Attorney General Cortlandt Skinner, who had gone through the document the day before and said, I have perused the within charter and find nothing therein contained inconsistent with His Majesty's honor or interest. Now let me bring this forward 250 years. If you look at our bank statements, if you look at our Vanguard mutual fund accounts, we are still, to this day, the minister, church wardens, and vestrymen of Trinity Church in Woodbridge, New Jersey. So the corporate name has survived. The idea of having two wardens has survived. And you know, in a lot of Episcopal churches, they have senior and junior wardens, they have priest and people's wardens. We don't, we just have wardens, consistent with our charter. Now, as far as the size of the vestry goes, I mean, back then it was, you could have as many as 10 people. Now it's all set by New Jersey state statute, and it has to be in multiples of 3. 3, 6, 9, or 12. We had 9 for a while. Now we have 6. We've gotten smaller. It happens. And as far as that annual meeting on the Tuesday after Easter, well, our bylaws now specify the 4th Sunday of January. It works out better. We have our annual diocesan convention in early March. We elect delegates to the convention, among other things. So that timing has changed. And, you know, there was a lot in the charter about property. Well, with the institution of the Diocese of New Jersey and the Episcopal Church, the way it works is that the property, our church building, everything else is actually held in trust for the diocese. So they are the ultimate owner. So all the issues of property that were so paramount back in the day when there was no governing church organization no longer apply. So think of it as a bit of history. And speaking of history, there was one thing I wanted to do at the beginning of this presentation that I'm going to do now instead. Now, I've talked about the Jonathan Dunham House, the rectory. Many of you know that we spent the better part of 4 years restoring the interior. Well, one of the things we found in that process was a whole bunch of basic kinds of documents related to Trinity in one way or another. And we're not talking about, anything near the majesty, you might say, of the charter. I mean, we're talking about financial statements, bills, you name it. So this past summer, we finally got everything out of the attic in the rectory, which is where it had been for God knows how many years. Brought it over here and did a little sorting out. But I made a point in that process to save all the receipts from Woodbridge businesses. And there are a lot of them, because you think about it, right? The phone company was right here downtown. Middlesex Water, right? A lot of things like that. But there are also like handymen, you know, contractors, that sort of thing. And you'd have one or two of those. I put them all aside. So Dan, did you come up? Here you go, ladies and gentlemen. There were 12 boxes of these up in the attic. And this one is all yours.
All right, thank you.
Well, it's just a few things for Dan to go through in the next few months while he waits for the museum to open, right?
Well, we certainly appreciate it, and
You can set it down, Dan.
I can set it down?
Yes, absolutely. You don't have to break your back.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So that's our presentation.
That's your presentation?
Absolutely.
Well, you know, and while you were done, after reading the charter, you know, everybody's sitting there and not knowing whether to clap or not, but this is quite appropriate.
Yeah,
It's a fantastic reading,
thank you.
and I hope it enlightened everyone in here again.
And I made sure to clear out around the back there, so as you're heading over to the parish house for the holiday party, you can get a closer look at the charter. So we hope you'll do that. Go ahead, Harry.
Hey, when you're alone here at the church sometimes, in addition to feeling the presence of God here in this historic building,
Yeah.
and you think of the house and the rectory and the people in the graves right here, and how old this area is, what do you feel?
Well, you feel the weight of that history. There's no question. I mean, 300 plus years of worship here in town. You know, that's important. I mean, and I grew up with history. I had a great aunt and great uncle they lived in a house built in 1807. They had Model Ts and Model As. They had a flower shop with all these old sort of products up on shelves. So that's what I grew up with. And for me, I mean, the history is a big piece of what's here. But I should point out that this is not just a historical church. This is very much an active congregation. That tree in the back, that's a giving tree. There are going to be 50 children between the ages of 2 and 8 that are going to get clothing this year because people took ornaments off that tree and went shopping. And you see a whole lot of those bags in the back. This is a part of our outreach here at Trinity. We do a soup kitchen, which I guess has got a new name now, Friday feeding or something like that. A Wednesday night dinner Eucharist, a food pantry, a diaper bank. And by the way, government doesn't help you with diaper banks. We're doing this on our own with some help from Community Food Bank of New Jersey. But it's a way that we reach out and we try to live our mission. Oh, and by the way, we are here every weekend. So if you don't have a church home, come see us. And I'll just point out, Christmas Eve, 5 o'clock, we have a children's sermon. 10:30, we have choir singing. You'll see me, I'm the tenor section most weekends, so I'll definitely be there. And then 11 o'clock is our midnight mass. Christmas Day, 10 a.m. And if you do have a church home, that's fine. More power to you. But I do have another invitation for you. Every year, we open up the Dunham House, the rectory, around Epiphany. This coming year, it's hard to think that we're going to be in 2020 in a week and a half, but that's how it goes. 2 weeks, but who's counting? January 5th, the Sunday, from 2 to 4. So come on over and see us. If you've never seen the interior after all that work we did, that 4 years of restoration, I mean, it's a perfect opportunity. And it is a community event as much as it is a church event, so we hope you will come.
Okay, everyone, I'd like to thank everyone for being here this evening. I'd like to say hello to TV 35. Everyone can wave. January 27th, I believe it is, our next 25th, I'm sorry, at the Presbyterian Church. We're again be welcoming back Gordon Bond to speak about Mr. Mundy, first African American to vote in the United States, and I'm sure he has a lot more information he'd like to share. And of course, if you would like to, the great mayor of Woodbridge Township, John McCormick, if you'd like to say a few words, John.
Sure. So, my schedule says holiday party at 7 o'clock at Trinity Church with the HAWT. You guys really know how to have a party. I mean, what's going on? I walked into a lecture. But it's okay. It's interesting.
We muscled in on the party, John.
No, I know. I'll be quick so you can get back to your party. But I'm making the rounds tonight. This is my 4th stop. I have 1 more stop. This is like a crazy week, but it's fun. You know we're working on the museum. It's starting to, it's not really starting to shape up. You can see progress anyway. We'll get that done as quickly as we can.
And there's no one who appreciates that more than me, since I live 4 doors down.
Oh, do you really?
Yes.
Oh, all right.
In the Rothfuss house.
Good, keep an eye on it for us then.
I will.
All right. And I'm glad you mentioned the food pantry. So we are, I can't say where yet, but there's a building in town. It's an old house, a large house, that we are going to try to rent. I talked to Maureen Jorgensen. I talked to Peggy Foley and Peter Barcelona, who does the food bank. They're limited in how much they can take sometimes, especially in frozen foods and foods that need to be refrigerated. So we're going to get a house, and we're going to stock it with a walk-in cooler. We're going to stock it with refrigerators, and then from now on, all 11 food pantries will have access to it, and you can take anything you can get your hands on, anything that anybody will donate. You'll be able to take it and then divide it up and get it out to your patrons like you do with the perishable foods, with the non-perishable foods. So it'll be a great place to get perishable foods. I can't wait to make the announcement. We had a meeting Friday with it, about it, and I think by the early part of the year we'll come out and say that this is a real good addition to the town. Because I don't go to the food pantries except when I visit, like I visit here. But I just know from talking to everybody that if they had a place to store, beef and cheese and milk and all these other things, it would make a world of difference to the people who need those things. So I can't wait to announce it, but I can't say where yet because it's a secret. And based on my faith, a little hint, based on my faith and the fact that I negotiated this with a person wearing a collar, I am not violating, that's all I'm going to say. I am not violating my sacred vow to not say anything, because even confession won't save me at that point. But that's good news. The History Museum is good news. We want to thank everybody here for your support as we're working on that. We had a little bit of, some crazy people that think everything we do is wrong. But they really didn't cause any trouble like we thought they would, just a little bit. It was election season, so people get crazy during elections. But that's done now. You're stuck with me for 4 more years. And during that time, hopefully this year, I don't know if this year think we'll be open.
I hope so.
I hope so too. I hope so too. So you guys have the inside when I'm telling you what to do on the inside. Whatever you want, however you want to set it up, whatever you want to put there. Already people like, you just got a box. I got people saying, oh, this would be great for the History Museum. This would be great for the History Museum. I already have too much for the History Museum. And we're not even close to being open yet. So I don't know how you're going to figure out what you do and how you do it. God bless you. But it's up to you. I'm not going to blame you. I'm just going to say I have nothing to do with it. I would have loved to have seen it out there, Mrs. Nussbaum, but Dan D'Arcy didn't want it. That's what I'm going to tell people. That's what I'm going to tell people. It's all Dan D'Arcy's fault. But anyway, I can't stay for the party. I'm just making the rounds. But everybody, please have a Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year. And 2020 promises to be a good year for the Historical Association and for the food pantries in Woodbridge. So thanks.
Thank you, John.